Others say it's a good time to take some money off the table. Either way, whether you're buying or selling, Fox Valley Coins in Naperville is the place to go. They stock large quantities of all the major bullion coins and bars. And here's what sets them apart. Unlike places that only pay melt value, Fox Valley Coins pays more for high-grade coins and scarcer dates. That's real money left in your pocket. They also buy scrap sterling flatware, jewelry, silver-plated items, and old proof sets. And they specialize in U.S. and foreign collector and investment coins and currency, both buying and selling. Fox Valley Coins, one light north of I-88 on Route 59 at Ferry Road in Naperville. Family owned with integrity since 1981.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This hour of the Shaun Thompson Show is sponsored exclusively by DonleyAuctions.com. They need your guns. Sell for top dollar. DonleyAuctions.com.
From the streets of Melrose Park to the trading floor of the Merc, he's fought for every dollar he's ever earned. And now, with personal liberty and our system of capitalism under assault in America, he's here to seize back our rights from the government. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Declaration of Independence in the other, he's Shaun Thompson. And this is the Shaun Thompson Show.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white,
Thank God I'm old. Do you ever feel like that, Squirrel? Ah, you're a young man. You don't know what old is. Old. You know how you know what old is in America? When you were taught by teachers who not only could teach you how to read and do math. You were taught by teachers who were proud of their country, not this new Marxist mafia, who understands if you're going to control perception, if you're going to control and induce self-loathingness, you must implement fear, obligation, and guilt. So one thing is for certain, you can never teach the real history of America. Because if you did, those kids would be so proud of themselves for being American, so proud of their country, so proud of the Enlightenment and the principles that didn't conquer, but enabled people to be free and represented rather than ruled. My next guest has been writing about this for years. He's a historian of the American frontier and so much more. New book, The National Road, George Washington and America's First Highway West. Brady Crytzer, how are you?
I'm good, Shaun. How are you?
Very good. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk to you. I have enjoyed you, and I've seen your writings and different things, but they've been writing about you for many years as well, as you really have tackled the American frontier, the American West, and why people should be proud of a country built on an idea, and built on that idea that has been truly progressive versus people who call themselves progressive, isn't it?
You know, if you study America long enough, Shaun, you really start to see the beauty of it. You start to see the amazing achievement that we've made here in this country. I recently did an op-ed for the Philadelphia Inquirer in support of President Trump's triumphal arch for 250 years of American history. That is such an incredible achievement that was so unlikely throughout our whole past. It's something worth celebrating, and I want people to join in that celebration with me.
So as you look at this, you know, and luckily enough, do you want to know, Brady, the blessing is I was not taught out of the Howard Zinn Hate Your Country books. And I was also taught from people who were Depression babies. That was kind of the beauty of being born in the 60s. You were still around those people, right? And these are people who had nothing. Nothing. We don't understand how poor that is, right? And you've got grandparents that could make soup out of chicken feet, and it was delicious soup. And they never used the word anxiety. They were never anxious. They were never in a bad mood. In fact, those people, the vast majority of them, were so proud and so happy just because they were in a country, the youngest and the richest. There has to be a recipe there. There has to be an understanding. In your opinion, when you look back at this, what do you think changed in the feeling? There are still, you have to understand, I now live in the South, and it's a different, people are different. They're proud of their country still. But when I come back to Illinois, or Illinois as it's more formally known, and you're around, they hate themselves. They hate the country. They hate what it was founded on. Is it strictly teachers? Does it really boil down to teachers and textbooks?
You know, Shaun, I don't know if I see that as much. I spend a lot of time in history classes with students. And I spend a lot of time with the founding generation, you know, reading their letters and going through their notes. I'm not a very political person because history kind of is an antidote to that in a way. You know, when you study history for a long time, things like D's and R's fall away, and you just see leadership. You just see really strong, good people. But I'll tell you the issue that I'm seeing with young people today, and it's not so much what you're seeing, but there's a general sense amongst them, and it's even more frightening to me. They've almost given up. They don't feel like the American dream is attainable for them for whatever reasons. They hear about AI taking their jobs. You know, when you're 20, you should be filled with hope. And I don't see that a lot from young people, and it's very upsetting. And this has happened in the last 10 years. So I think a book like this, seeing people who also had very little hope, but all they did have was a strong work ethic and a desire to achieve, I think that's a good lesson for everybody.
Well, what else is fascinating when you look at our country and you look at George Washington, the reality of things is they're young men. They were young. Everyone thinks they're old, but they're not old. It was just a different kind of wisdom and a different kind of mentality there. And when you look at George Washington and you're doing the research for the book, what shocked you the most, what impressed you the most, and what didn't you know when you went into it?
Well, you know, this is my 8th book about George Washington, Shaun, so I feel like I've gotten to know him pretty well, but what always strikes me is we see him as a statue. We have a painting of him in our wallets, all of us do. You know, when you really learn the man, he's a man of many deep faults and bad habits, I think. He's one of the things that's most striking to me is that he is filled with self-doubt throughout his career, whether it be as a young colonel on the frontier, as a general in the Continental Army, even as president. He always felt like he wasn't good enough for the job, that he wasn't up to the challenge. And I think that's what made him a great leader, was he didn't believe he could do this all by himself. But I'll tell you where he did find strength, and I think we could all learn from this. He had a deep and abiding faith in God. And when you read his notes at any time in his life, he talks about what he called providence. And providence to him meant that he had a destiny and America had a destiny that he could not see with his mortal eyes, but he knew that God had a plan. And in his darkest moments, places like Valley Forge, that's what got him through. And I think that's so powerful of a message for us.
And you know, it's fascinating. If you look at the historical records of what they faced and how they faced it without any technology, people don't realize how many of them didn't have shoes. Literally didn't have shoes. You know, I mean, you listen to these kids. We've got the technology. We have coats that could offset the cold in which these guys could only dream of. They had nothing. They had wool. And when you look back and you think of it, the only thing that was different, the only thing that got them through that was their character. And when you read the letters, you're talking 250 years ago, and the understanding and the comprehension of thought and the fact that they had a decision to change the trajectory of history. The intellect of these people, it's amazing. It's far greater than it exists today. If we're lucky, it's the same, isn't it?
Well, so we have to remember when you're dealing with history, you're reading letters of the most literate people. So, you know, most of my research, Shaun, I deal with the frontier. So places like Western Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. You know, these people are tough, smart people, but they're not writing a lot down. They're an oral culture. They're going to pass down their histories sitting around a campfire or sitting around a fireplace. So those are people that are kind of harder to find in history, but they are as much a part of the revolutionary generation as anyone. So let's say we have someone who writes this really detailed book. That is just their opinion, but we've also heard from them a lot in history. So I try to find the regular hardworking people that we don't often hear from. I consider myself something of a blue-collar historian. You know, I'm from Pittsburgh. If I had gone into the family business, I would have been a fourth-generation steel worker. As cliche as that sounds, it's true. And I know those people have strong opinions, and they are educated, but how they convey it's a little different. So absolutely. I would challenge anyone going into history. You know, we have a lot of people from highly educated institutions, in Virginia and New York and Boston in the Revolutionary period, and they love to hear themselves talk. They would have loved social media. But I try to find the people whose voices are a little tougher to find because they are as much a player as that story as anyone.
How much of a vision do you think they had or an understanding of what was possible at the time they were making these decisions? And I'm curious to know how you got the National Road and George Washington's America's his first highway west. Did they have any understanding of just what they were? Well, any understanding is an insult. Did they have an understanding of the gravity of what they were doing and how successful they could have they ended up being? How did they always envision the America we now take for granted? Did they understand what they were really creating?
You know, I think some did, most did not. I was just leading a tour at Lexington and Concord a few weeks ago in Boston, and we were explaining the fight at Concord Bridge, right? And these were people that weren't really fighting for their country per se at the time. They saw their homes in Concord being burned by British soldiers, and they were fighting to get back to their families. Now, that is the shot heard around the world. That's a battle that's going to change history. But like the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, used to say, all politics is local. I think all history is local too. Mm-hmm. So they weren't fighting for the 21st century. They were literally fighting to save their families. But that's what the revolution is. It's this grand series of very personal sacrifices, and not just in places like Boston, but in places like the Great Lakes around Fort Detroit, in places like Kentucky, in places like Western Virginia, and I mean, these are local battles that in totality change the world.
I still have a hard time when the so-called, the idea that we even pretend there are kings. When the king comes and all this, his mother and God save the queen, I still have a hard time because I used to love the idea that a couple of people in this country said, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm not going to be anybody's slave, anybody's servitude. I'm not going to pay homage, and I'm certainly not going to get taxed. And I love when you hear them talk about the idea that they could be taxed for living, taxed for buying, taxed for existing and earning. I still look at taxation that way. Do you think that Americans today understand how repulsed the people who founded this country were by the idea that they were but subjects to a king or a queen?
The issue of being a subject was really not as contentious as I think we moderns make it out to be. We have to remember the revolution is like a 20-year era of history.
Yeah.
1763 to 83. So this is an evolving, just think how much we've changed in 20 years. It's an evolving process. On the issue of taxation, boy, we could talk about this forever. The founders would not recognize this country and the absolutely insane level of taxation that we have. We have taxes still in place from World War I today. The notion of an income tax was something that would have been completely foreign to them. It would have flown entirely in the face of their interpretation of freedom. And freedom is the key word here, because part of being and living in a free society for the revolutionary generation was the ability to make a living, the ability to support your family without the bonds of government in the way. And if I could talk about my book for a little bit.
Yes, please.
The National Road, this grand interstate from the East Coast all the way to Vandalia, Illinois, your old stomping grounds, that was one of the first things that new immigrants, when they came here, saw was that highway.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a highway with no tolls or taxes at all. It was completely free. And they had come from Europe, where every road was privately owned and taxed and tolled to the extreme. So for a lot of these immigrants coming here in 1810 and 1820 and 1830, their first interaction with America is a free highway that's over 600 miles long, and it'll take you as far as you want to go, and you didn't pay a cent. So the idea that the freedom and taxes are going hand in hand, or I should say freedom from taxes, but that's as old as America itself.
You know what else? I'm curious to know your thoughts. I kind of know him, as I'm somewhat familiar with a lot of what you're doing, especially if you're focusing on George Washington. What do you think the founding fathers or George Washington himself would say about the idea that it is completely without any ramification, without any consequence, that a politician in this country in 2026 can openly and knowingly lie to their public. When his whole thing was, he couldn't tell a lie. I'm George Washington. I cut the tree down the whole 9 yards. I mean, seriously, the idea that, in Chicago, you know one thing. The reason FBI agents show up in two is because they're going to say you lied to them and you do a year and a day. But if a politician or an FBI agent lies to the public, that's perfectly fine. It's amazing how that's flipped. I mean, after all, we're a country built because we wouldn't tolerate a lie, let alone a politician that did. Don't you think that George Washington would be appalled at how politicians lie to us about what they're going to do with our tax dollars and there are no consequences?
Well, I can say I know he would have been appalled because he was appalled in his own time by that very thing. People ask me what would George Washington think about America today. He probably wouldn't recognize any of it except what's going on in Congress. The deception, the lies, the self-dealing. In his farewell address, when he left the presidency, his warning to America was to stay away from political parties because he knew they were divisive and he knew they pitted us against each other and he knew that people were self-serving in that regard. So he dealt with it a lot in his own time. He dealt with it in the colony of Virginia when he was still a colonist. He dealt with it with the Congress whenever he was president. That's the great thing about his letters. We know exactly how he would feel about this. And I would encourage any of your listeners to read his farewell address when he left office because he knew the direction America was going even in 1796. And wouldn't you be darned to know that so much of what he talks about is still pretty relevant.
Oh, absolutely it is. And, I've done my own kind of thinking on this when it comes to who these people were. And when you listen to them and when you listen to the way in which they focused on what was important, I think it boils down to character. And they might not have had the technology. They didn't have the convenience or the ease. They didn't have the machinery. But boy, oh boy, did they have character. And when you read what they say to each other and about what they wanted, we have all this technology, all these iPhones and phones, cars. We don't have half the character that George Washington had. He just had a terrible smile, right? What do you think?
Boy, every generation has its heroes and its bums. You know what? I could talk about technology a bit. I can tell you as an educator, I know AI has a lot of potential, but it has been devastating for my classes because so much of history is engaging in the material, and I always stress this to my students, giving your opinion of it. We can all look at the same document and come to 10 different conclusions, but a computer is not going to do that for you. And I've read dozens and dozens of AI essays, which, by the way, scream of AI immediately. No, they're not fooling anyone. Yeah. But there's a cost to that, and the cost is that people aren't engaging in, as you know, the rigor of thought. I mean, sometimes challenging what you think you know is the best way to learn. I learn every day that way. We're always learning new interpretations. So
you don't fall in love.
Today's not working for us. Yeah.
You don't fall in love, right? I mean, when you're reading what they're thinking and what they're conveying and you fall in love with the idea. You are there, and you're picking it. Am I an anti-federalist? Am I a federalist? And and when you look, one of the most amazing things to me, and I think all kids should read it, are the letters not between the generals, but between the soldiers in Civil War. And the thought of what that could have been if it hadn't been. A million Americans at a time when the population was infinitesimal compared to what it is now. And how, your opinion changes. This is one of the things about history and history teachers, I think, is fascinating. I'm a big fan of those people that poke, and pick and don't agree with it. And if you just sit back for a minute and you say, who's the president that a 5-year-old and a 95-year-old will tell you is the greatest president? And everybody will say Lincoln. And who's the only president that resided over a civil war and told the military to kill the other Americans? And you argue that. It's really fascinating. And what would George Washington think of a civil war? Would he be for it? After all, he wasn't for taking it. Would he be against it when you look at the way in which they create? So it's very interesting. And how do you think like that if you don't read it yourself? AI isn't going to tell you that. Only some jerk on Chicago radio is going to tell you, wait a minute, did he just say that the greatest president is not Lincoln? You know what I mean? So you can only do that if you fall in love with the concepts and the thoughts and the challenges, because you're not teaching kids how to recite what you think. You're teaching them how to think. And that's what's kind of different, isn't it?
It is. And you know what, Shaun, if I could, I would challenge a bit. The first 3 chapters of The National Road are about George Washington's vision for the American future, which he didn't believe was overseas. He believed it was in the West. And one of the things that cemented that for him was in 1784, 1 year after the Revolution, he crosses over the Appalachian Mountains to explore what he called the West. And he was treated very badly by Scots-Irish settlers when he went there.
Man, it was my great-grandfather was probably a jerk. No, go ahead.
Well, he came back to Virginia, and he warned the governor of Virginia that there's 2 separate Americas forming.
Yes, there are.
Not north and south, but east and west. And that leads us to an event in the 1790s. Washington believed if you couldn't find a way to connect these people over the mountains, and the National Road is his answer, that we could have secession and civil war. And I would challenge when you said that never happened. It did happen in 1794.
Yeah.
An event we call the Whiskey Rebellion.
You wrote a book about that, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah. At the time, they called it the Western Insurrection, because everything Washington predicted, right again, in 1784 comes through 10 years later. These farmers in places like Western PA and Kentucky tried to secede and join the Spanish. Washington had to lead a 13,000-man army himself against those rebels. And it was the only time in American history that a sitting president, as commander-in-chief, led the army himself.
Well, they were some bad caballeros.
So he did have his civil war for sure.
Yeah. Well, people don't realize, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Ulster Scots, the vast majority of them were indentured servants? They came here and they sold themselves for 12 years, right? Was the deal? And
that's pretty early on. That's more like the 1600s. That would be over by this point.
They're the reason they have Marquess of Queensberry rules when you fight, because they were wild animals. You did not want to fight one of these son of a guns. And in fact, I'm wondering, when you look at real history, I mean, who else would have killed the Comanches, the enemy of all, except for the Ulster Scots? They were the only things that were close to the Vikings, weren't they?
So they came from a world, they suffered under what they called landlordism.
Yeah.
And what that meant was in Europe, they worked the land, they harvested the crops, and they got none of the profits. The English kept everything from them. So when they came to America, they were fiercely, as you mentioned, fiercely independent and fiercely attached to whatever land they could get. And this is true from Pennsylvania all the way to Illinois. And that was to them, the great expression of freedom we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
What makes you free, right? That's something they can pass on to their children and grandchildren. Only lords and dukes in Europe got that privilege to do that. So they were not willing to give up their land. They would fight anybody, including themselves, to keep it. And that leads to obviously so much of the story of westward expansion in the early republic.
Yeah. Yes, and they were the Comanches said, boy, stay away from those guys. They have clothes on, and they will bite your face off. The name of the book is The National Road, George Washington and the America's First Highway West. Now, this is how many books you've written, because I know about a few of them. How many have you written so far?
So this will be my 8th book.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. And you're still actively teaching at Robert Morris University, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So where's the best place? Because I want everybody to buy the book, The National Road, but where's the best place for people to learn about Professor Brady Crytzer?
Well, you can go to my website, bradycrytzer.com. I'm not hard to find. I'm on every social media. I have a YouTube channel. I'm an editor at the Journal of the American Revolution, so you can see a lot of my stuff there. But bradycrytzer.com has all of my links. I'm very active with videos, podcasts. I like to be one of those people that I think uses technology for good.
Absolutely.
Meet people where they are. Maybe not everybody has time to read an article. Maybe they have 30 minutes at the gym to listen to a podcast. So I am all over the place.
See, and I'm optimistic because I think that their AI, someone's going to say, you know what, this Brady Crytzer is a hell of a historian. Let's take his 8 books and load it up to AI. And this way we could save the future. So thank you.
No doubt.
Thank you very much for making time for me. It means a lot. I've enjoyed your stuff for many years. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Shaun.
Thank you. We'll be back with your calls and comments.
He believes in freedom, capitalism, and individual liberty. And because of that, he's become an enemy of the state. He's Shaun Thompson, and this is the Shaun Thompson Show on AM 560. The Answer.
Do you owe $10,000 or more in credit card debt or personal loans? With credit card debt at all-time highs, Debt Relief Advocates is urgently notifying consumers of debt relief now being made available, designed to aid consumers with out-of-control credit card debt. Those who qualify and enroll for this relief program will only have to pay back a fraction of what they owe. This is not bankruptcy or a debt consolidation loan. This is a relief program that credit card companies